I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We have a great show for you tonight, packed with information, including the very latest on the storms that are heading our way. I'm going to have an extended chat with meteorologist Matt Zafino. But first, we're going to take a look at a problem that many of you have emailed us about. It's rundown buildings covered with graffiti. Tonight, we're going to focus on one building in particular, the old Gordon's Fireplace Shop in Northeast Portland. That is our big story tonight. From time to time, we like to revisit projects or proposals with the question, whatever happened to that? The old Gordon's Fireplace building in Northeast Portland is a great example. It used to be elegant, maybe even stately. Now it's most certainly a mess. Several years ago, there were big plans for redevelopment, including office space and retail. But today, that historic building sits vacant on a prominent piece of land right along Interstate 84, covered in spray paint. Here's investigative reporter Kyle Aboshi.
History is important. It's why we save old structures and protect landmarks. So why is it that one of Portland's most historic buildings looks like this? The old Gordon's Fireplace Shop in Northeast Portland, which dates back more than a century, has become a magnet for graffiti. There's broken glass and falling bricks.
Well, as you can see, it's quite an eyesore, and it's been this way for years.
From across the street, Warren Webb, co-owner of the Blind Onion, has watched the property decay. This historic building is a skeleton of what it used to be.
It's just frustrating.
The building was constructed in the early 1900s as a workshop for house parts. It got the name the Aircraft Factory after workers started building wooden airplane parts in the three-story structure. Over time, it became a furniture store, then Gordon's Fireplace Shop, for more than 60 years. In 2016, Gordon's Fireplace closed its doors, and this old building hasn't been the same since, despite big plans for renovation.
A lot of promises, and we just haven't heard anything.
In 2017, Spokane-based developer Rob Brewster and his partners bought the building with plans to create office space and retail. But after the pandemic hit, they reevaluated to focus on residential. Brewster blames red tape for slowing down the project. City permits and fees alone cost them $322,000.
But the real core of the problem is that when we went in for permit to do housing, we were told that it'd be 6 to 8 months to get a permit. And I said at the time, look, if it takes longer than that, you're just putting us right into the middle of a different economic climate.
And sure enough, he explained, that's what happened. Roughly a year later, construction costs and interest rates had gone up.
We hear a lot of complaints about the permitting process.
Ken Ray, spokesperson for the city's Bureau of Development Services, admits the permitting process is complex, with a lot of back and forth. But in this case, the city's review teams typically turn things around in about a week or so, Ray said, suggesting it was just as much the developer who held things up. In the meantime, the building fell into disrepair, generating complaints. Since 2019, there have been 8 code enforcement cases at the property.
You know, when you have bricks falling off a building or broken windows and glass on the sidewalk, that poses a danger to the public.
Currently, the property has unpaid fines totaling more than $10,000 for code enforcement violations, and the penalties could increase. Brewster failed to show up for a code enforcement hearing in December and again on Tuesday.
What do you make of these fines?
I think it's a waste of time. Put the money and the effort into coming up with a solution instead of just continuously fining somebody. It's just kind of childish.
Could the city be doing more to motivate the redevelopment of this property?
Well, the city's already done quite a bit.
Last year, the city council took several steps to try and spur new housing by freezing increases to system development charges or fees paid by developers, and making it easier to renovate office space to residential. But specific to this old building, KGW filed a public records request for all emails between City Hall and Brewster's company, Interurban Development. The emails show city officials offered to help with graffiti, broken glass, and masonry. Just this week, after months of inactivity, crews were seen removing some of the broken glass.
So what is the outlook for this building? I mean, will it be redeveloped? Will you be able to make the renovations that you'd like to?
That's our intention, yep.
Any timeline?
hopefully start within the next month or so. We finally got a good construction contract budget now that came down from where it had escalated so drastically a year and a half ago. Brewster
argues his project isn't the problem. It's the city and the way it's being run.
But I think Portland sticks out in a way that is, it's incredibly challenging.
Brewster summed it up in an email. The city is more intent on fines and listening to griping neighbors than actually addressing the rampant drug and homelessness issues that are driving lenders, developers, and businesses from Portland. But his stalled projects aren't just limited to Portland. In his native Spokane, Brewster and his company are renovating the historic McKinley School. Neighbors complain the dormant project is an eyesore. It has unpaid property taxes of more than $14,000, according to the county treasurer. To his credit, Brewster does have a resume of projects, including the Pine Street Market in downtown Portland and the Under Armour offices. None of them are quite as visible as the old Gordon's Fireplace building, a historic structure, which looks like it's been forgotten.
Kyle joins me now. I know that we both live kind of in that area and have driven by the building a million times.
See it all the time.
Oh my gosh. Shouldn't he be required to put up maybe security guards or something to keep people out of there?
Good question. I mean, a lot of buildings, companies, they do these days. They hire private security to monitor. You could also potentially put up a chain link fence. I asked him specifically about that, and he said, well, that might require another permit, which would delay things once again. And it's an example of more bureaucracy.
Yeah, maybe it wouldn't if the city did it and charged him for doing it. We'll see. And that ground floor, I know that has a mural that was intentionally put there, right?
Right. 2020, the city helped to coordinate that. A community art project, basically a mural spray painted on the ground level of that building. Great intentions. Again, the developer says that actually didn't help. It invited more graffiti on the upper floors, illegal, ugly graffiti that now you see that each and every time you drive by there.
Yeah, and the good news is maybe he starts work next month?
He suggests so. Suggested maybe next month or in the months to follow. He certainly has the permits to begin that process, so you hate to say it, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah, let's hope he does. I know we get a ton of emails from people in that neighborhood saying, what's going on with this building?
Yes.
So now I'm glad you finally brought us the answer.
We'll see.
Thank you, Kyle. All right, well, you may have heard there's a storm heading our way. Let's turn now to our chief meteorologist, Matt Zaffino, for the latest on the approaching storm. And Matt, I know that you've been talking about this all day. You're the hardest working guy in the building, so thanks for being here. This is a big deal. I wonder if you could talk with us about the differences between snow, sleet, and freezing rain.
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. And to your first comment there, I hope people have heard about this by now because we need to be ready for it. We still have time to prepare too, because I don't think it's going to get really bad on the roads until maybe 24 hours from now, and maybe even a little bit later than that in the Portland area. But as far as the precipitation type, and that's always one of the biggest forecast challenges with an event like this. Are we going to get snow, or is it going to be freezing rain, or is it going to be sleet? Sleet, by the way, is rain that's frozen when it reaches the ground. Freezing rain arrives at the ground as a liquid, but then it's falling into temperatures that are below freezing, so it coats everything with ice, be it trees, power lines, your car, your windshield, your walkway. So that's the difference. We all know what snow is, too.
Nastiest stuff in the Northwest, I want to say, by the way. When I moved down here from the Seattle area, I couldn't believe it.
It's bad. It's really bad. And one of the problems with it, too, Pat, is that ice is heavy. Yeah. So it tends to brings down power lines and tree branches way more than snow does. In the aviation community, of course, they're really concerned with icing because it adds weight and changes the aerodynamics of a plane. So icing is a really big deal. Let's go through this, though. With a normal situation with rain, the clouds are up here, and for most of our precipitation, if not all, here in the mid-latitudes, our precipitation actually begins as snow, even in the summertime. But then it melts as it reaches warmer air, and you get rain as long as it's above 32 degrees all the way down to the ground. There are some situations where snowflakes survive at, say, 35, 36, 37, but that's a different story. So when you get freezing rain, there's this layer of warm air that's above 32. So you have snowflakes, reaches that warm air that's 32 or warmer, and says, hey, I am melting into rain. And then it falls back into cold air that's below 32 degrees, and that's when the liquid water reaches the ground and freezes on contact. That's the worst case scenario. Sleet's a little bit different. You still have the warm layer, but notice it's not as thick here. It's only about a couple thousand feet thick, if you will, and so the snowflakes fall into that air that's above 32 degrees, and they partially melt. They don't necessarily all the way melt, but they turn into globs of, wet snow, if you will, but then they fall back down into the below freezing air. And the below freezing air here in a sleet situation is much thicker, so it has time to freeze into ice pellets, if you will, before it reaches the ground. Whereas here, the freezing air, below freezing air, isn't nearly as thick, that layer, so it doesn't have time. So that's why it reaches the ground as a liquid. And then with snow, it's just below freezing all the way down. It starts to snow in the clouds and reaches the ground as snow. So that's what we're facing here. We may see a period of sleet as we get a little bit of a nose of warm air moving in above Portland during the evening hours tomorrow, but I think that's going to be the worst of it as far as we're concerned here in Portland, Pat.
Okay, and I think that sleet, that's the stuff that's almost like little BBs that are falling down, right?
Yeah, ice pellets is another word for it. It's often confused with hail. Hail and sleet are similar because they both arrive at the ground as ice, but it's a completely different process that causes hail. We'll get hail in the summertime when temperatures are in the 40s or 50s. That's if it's above freezing, you're getting hail. If it's below freezing, you're getting sleet because it's a situation like this.
Okay, and good luck walking if it's freezing rain. I've never seen, before I moved here, never seen water fall on ice. It's brutal. Anyway, I know that you've been relying on a lot of the different models that are going on throughout the world as you try to forecast all this. Can you explain some of the differences in those?
You bet, and it's a great tool, and we rely on that to give you good forecasts, but there's many different models now. And then within any model group, let's say the European model, what we do is we run what we call ensembles or groups of models. And they each give us a slightly different solution. So here's an example. This is for Portland. This is going forward with temperatures, actually with something we call QPF, which is quantitative precipitation forecast.
Nice.
It's the amount of moisture that is going to fall out of the sky. And it doesn't take into account the phase of that, whether it's snow or sleet or freezing rain. But it gives us a good idea as to how much moisture the atmosphere is going to drop on us, and then you decide, is it going to be frozen or not? But as far as the modeling goes, in the ensemble approach, every single gray line here represents a different model, okay? And in the beginning, they're all together, but notice the spread. Now, the black line here is an average, and the blue line is what we call the deterministic model. That's the one that we get maps for, and we see that one map, and it's like, this is how it's going to be. Those aren't always right. So with the ensemble approach, you look at this, and notice it's a big difference between about a half an inch of moisture to a couple of inches of moisture. And you look at, and then what we do is we average that, and then we get statistics on that. And if the spread is less, then we have higher confidence that, okay, this model knows what it's going to do, and this is within the range of possibility. We know that that's probably the best way to go. And then look out in time, you get this wild spread, because as you go farther and farther out in time, the models change a lot because of the physics and the dynamics of the models themselves. So that's what the ensemble approach is. Here's another example of it. It looks like, we'll call this a spaghetti chart because it looks like a bowl of spaghetti with the models going all over a place and the really widespread farther out in time. One final graphic on this. This is from the Met Office, the UK Met Office over in the UK. So a lot of it depends on the initial conditions. You know, you think like, okay, we know exactly what the weather is doing at this point in time. We're not talking about a forecast. We're like, it's an observation. This is what is happening. But when you're forecasting numerically, you need to know the state of the atmosphere over a very wide area and then a very wide area vertically as well. And of course, we live next to the Pacific Ocean, which is a big data void. So it takes a lot of fancy math to make up for that lack of data. And then what you'll do with ensembles is you'll say, okay, you'll just kind of tweak the initial conditions a little bit and make them a little bit different and see how that changes the output of the model. And then you get a different forecast depending on the initial conditions of that model. And then if you look at this circle, it's climatology, and this blue area is the forecast uncertainty. Well, you want to land somewhere in there, but again, there's a lot of spread, so we will rely on statistics to give us an average, and the less spread there is, the higher the confidence we have. And that's just for one model. We have several different models that we do this for.
Wow, fascinating. All right, thank you, Matt. By the way, folks, I hope you really appreciate that. He's not a TV guy who knows weather. He's a meteorologist who happens to be on TV, and he's really good.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, Matt. Coming up on the story, we'll take you out to the northwest Washington County and the small town of Banks. Big news there this week, and it's not good news. The town's lumber mill is shutting down permanently. We'll hear from city leaders and the company for the reason why when the story returns. A longtime lumber mill in Washington County is closing its doors. For decades, it was a staple in the small community of Banks, surviving the ups and downs of a sometimes very turbulent industry. Some city leaders say they were caught off guard, and now they worry about the effects down the road for their budget, even their schools. Thomas Schultz has our story.
Tucked away in northwest Washington County is Banks, a town of less than 2,000 people. There's a main street, railroad tracks, and for decades, a sawmill.
It's hard to put into words how important it's been because it's always been there.
Marcia Kirk, president of the Banks Historical Society, says the town has always been rooted in timber.
Timber is our lifeblood.
Though now, that's changing. On Tuesday, Hampton Lumber announced it was shutting down the mill permanently. 58 jobs lost in an industry
It's been a staple.
gone. A decision that surprised city leaders.
All of our plans have included that mill being there.
Mayor Stephanie Jones says Banks relies heavily on the mill for fees like water usage, and she expects trickle-down effects.
It's also kind of a big impact for our school district because one of the things that helps fund the school district are timber sales.
And a reason Hampton Lumber says it's closing the Banks mill, possible changes in state policy, something that could affect lumber mills across the state of Oregon.
It's a real disappointment for everyone.
Kristen Rasmussen, the director of communications for Hampton Lumber, says a proposed habitat conservation plan would cut harvests on state forests by up to a third, from 285 million board feet to around 180 million feet.
That's a massive hit for local sawmills.
Rasmussen says the Banks mill relies heavily on the Tillamook and Clatsop state forests for timber, and issues they're facing aren't unique. In 1988, the Oregon Forest Resources Institute found there were 360 wood processing mills statewide. By 2022, just 167.
It's a really hard time. It's been a hard week.
Still, the Oregon Department of Forestry says the timber industry is volatile and their conservation plan pivotal, setting aside land to protect endangered species like the northern spotted owl, the marbled murrelet, and coho salmon. They say the plan complies with the Endangered Species Act, covering 640,000 acres for 70 years. Though, in Banks, concerns remain.
There needs to be a better balance between protecting our resources, but also managing them in a way that makes sense for the economy.
Thomas Schultz, KGW News.
Thanks, Thomas. We're told there are some options for those nearly 6 workers who were laid off. The company that ran the mill, Hampton Lumber, is giving them the opportunity to move to another plant. For those who do not want to go, they will get a severance. Still to come on the story, Oregon's legislative session is 3.5 weeks away, but House Republicans released a plan for a bill to undo a lot of Measure 110. We'll explain their proposal and share some of your thoughts on what needs to be done about the measure when the story returns. Oregon's 2024 legislative session starts in less than a month, and lawmakers are now getting ready with their bills. Today, House Republicans introduced a bill to bring back criminal penalties for drug use, essentially undoing big parts of Measure 110. Here are some of the bullet points. They want to make possession of drugs like fentanyl, heroin, and meth a Class A misdemeanor. People would be given the choice of treatment or jail time. It also bans public use of drugs and requires prison sentences for drug dealers and manufacturers. You kind of probably, if you paid attention, know what it's like for Oregon Republicans. Not great. Their bill isn't likely to succeed on its own, but there are likely to be some big changes in that law regardless. A bipartisan committee of lawmakers has been meeting over the last several months to hear from law enforcement, jails, courts, along with people working in drug treatment and prevention. Yesterday, they introduced 3 committee bills that will deal with addiction crisis, behavioral health, and public safety. The language of the bills has not been released yet. They also heard from the state's Alcohol Drug Policy Commission, which presented a 14-part list of recommendations for lawmakers on Measure 110. It had things like improving prevention infrastructure, increasing access to medications like methadone, recovering housing, and harm reduction like Narcan. Meanwhile, the Oregon Health Authority says the funding side of Measure 110 is finally starting to bear some fruit. Their data shows that behavioral health resource network providers reported a nearly 300% increase in people seeking services from July of 2022 to June of 2023. They set up a data dashboard where you can see where the Measure 110 money is going to providers across the state and how much has been spent. In Multnomah County, for example, millions of dollars have gone into peer support services and housing, but a lot less into substance use disorder treatment and supported employment. And only 38% of the money allocated to providers has been spent. We asked for your thoughts when it comes to Measure 110. Lawley told us the state needs to put more money into opening more drug treatment and alcohol treatment centers. Unfortunately, jails are still doing things these drug and alcohol treatment centers should be doing. And another viewer wrote, should not go backwards into criminalizing 110, force the people into treatment. One of the suggestions that came up during the Joint Committee meeting was having a person act as a drug prevention czar to coordinate all the different agencies working on the drug crisis across the state. The idea was pretty enthusiastically received during the meeting, but viewer Lois has some reservations. Based on the inertia and non-accountability of our current government, she writes, a drug czar to coordinate the state's drug crisis response seems like just another bureaucratic layer of inaction. We also got an email from someone who says they're in recovery now and that they know what drug users need. Mark wrote, I'm 4 years, 10 months clean. We need detox places and a lot more inpatient services. We need to put peer support in there, people that have gone through the journey of recovery. We also need transitional housing. I'm a firm believer that we do not need to lock addicts up. We need to help these people, and we need to seriously invest in mental health services. But several people told us they did not want the state to invest in prevention. They want parents to do more to keep kids from using drugs. Vicky wrote to say, please do not try to foist parenting onto the state. Difficult situation, but parents need to accept some responsibility. A lot of great comments last night. Thanks for that. Please let us know what you think about Measure 110 or any of the topics we talked about tonight or anything else you're curious about. Send us an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com. Or you can call and leave a voicemail. The number's 503-226-5090. That all gets through even if there's snow and ice falling outside. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff is coming your way next, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow at 6:30. Rain, snow, whatever's coming our way.